Welcome back, welcome back. Hello to the folks who are here in person, as well to the folks on the live stream. My name is Indigo Sparks. We are here at 180 Maiden Lane for the 2025 iteration of Studio Demo. Studio Demo is a broadcast hub featuring New Ink's wider creative community where conversations, demonstrations, and creative exchanges happen live. Today's talk on museum sustainability provides a space to discuss the opportunities and challenges facing today's museums. How are museums thinking about their environmental impact? Our next guest, who both support cultural institutions in developing long-term sustainability plans, will discuss what approaches institutions are taking towards stewardship and how artists, curators, and museum workers can do more to bring about positive change. We'll hear from Laura Lupton, the founder and principal of LHL Consulting, a consulting firm that centers art, climate, and our collective future. Laura is the co-founder of several collaborative ventures, including Galleries Commit, Artists Commit, Barter, and the Visual Arts PAC, and is on the founding committee for the Gallery Climate Coalition New York chapter. Her recent climate action project clients include the ADAA, MoCA, and Hauser and Worth, and she is currently working with Getty to lead the PST Art Climate Impact Program. Joining her is Whitney McGuire, Esquire, who helps organizations in arts and culture rethink their impact on people and the planet. As a lawyer, professor, former inaugural Associate Director of Sustainability at the Guggenheim, and co-founder of Sustainable Brooklyn, Whitney combines systems thinking, design, and legal expertise to create lasting change. You can read more about them on demofestival.org. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage now, Whitney and Laura.
Hello, hello. Hi.
Hi.
How's everyone doing? Good, good. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Whitney. Good to see you.
We're here to talk about museum sustainability. But first, we want to thank everyone involved in organizing DEMO2025. Give it up for them. Give it up for the staff. Give it up for everyone who's involved in this. This is wonderful and a huge undertaking, so we're grateful. Yeah.
Echo that, and also a shout out to Kimberly Drew on the last panel, Salome who organized it, and myself all kind of got our start at Creative Time about 10 years ago. So
I love
it feels
that.
like a real
Worlds
family
colliding.
reunion happening today.
Yes, yes. Cool. Well.
So we talked a little bit before coming on. Both Whitney and I do somewhat similar work working with institutions on long-term sustainability strategy and planning. We have a lot of similarities in the way we approach that, and also are often in dialogue about some of those projects that we're working on. But we kind of set the plan for today up as a series of questions that we can ask each other. I'm excited to learn a little bit from you, and also to be able to kind of help define some of these terms and talk about what it looks like.
Yeah.
So to kick off, our first question, based on the topic of this panel, museum sustainability, I'd love to hear how you define museum sustainability. Like, what does that mean to you? What would you define that as?
Sure. So museum sustainability for me differs, between institutions, right? So it's like if we're talking about a museum of natural history, that would be, to me, different than a major art museum. And so as the first person to hold a full-time role as a sustainability director in a major art museum, I was largely defining what museum sustainability meant while I was flying the plane. And so I arrived at this, this practice of embedding sustainability and really responsibility within the environmental, social, and economic spaces into every facet of museum operations, programming, and governance. So, that is and we can talk more about like how I did that, but it really requires a multi-pronged approach. You have to be a little Delulu, committed to the Delulu. But ultimately, I'm really proud of the progress that we've been able to make in museum sustainability within the United States, and we definitely look to our peers abroad to further inform, how this definition continues to evolve. What about you? What's it mean to you?
Yeah, I think I would echo that heavily on the similar themes with different applications for different institutions, both for museum sustainability and kind of the broader art world, what sustainability means. For a large major institution and thinking about a place that has a large physical building footprint, a landscape or grounds, audiences for exhibitions that are major loan shows with international work coming in, like what it means to kind of have a conversation about the environmental footprint of those or the community impact footprint of those is a very different conversation than a community neighborhood experimental art space.
Right.
Something that I think has been really interesting in that work is how both of those institutions can actually learn a lot from each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'll often maybe have a conversation where somebody thinks that it's like a one-way channel of information flow, like the major institutions should be doing this work and then distributing it to the smaller spaces.
When it's really harder for those major institutions to do the work than the smaller institutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really great opportunities for the major institutions to think about, especially building envelope infrastructure upgrades, things that can support the larger network of communities. But a lot of the practices that need to be implemented at major institutions are just like baked into the fabric of smaller community experimental art spaces, like a regular reuse of materials, being really closely tapped into your community's engagement, making sure that you have like close caretaking relationships of your workers and team. One thing that I will say in terms of like what is sustainability, that term itself is like such a broad term and like no one knows what, I mean, people know what it means. The UN has a definition of what sustainability is. But we've also been thinking about, maybe in both of our work, this idea of resiliency and these multifacets and areas of resiliency. So things like environmental resiliency, which is maybe some of what our work focuses on, but also things like financial resiliency, emotional resiliency, communal, the resiliency of your community. And an area that has become increasingly relevant to me is disaster resiliency.
Yes.
We just had I'm back and forth between here and Los Angeles. We just had a major Los Angeles wildfire that really directly affected many of our cultural institutions. And watching the cultural spaces' response to that work, I'm personally really proud of some of the community building we've done over the past 2 years through the PST Art Climate Impact Program, which was supported by Getty, to kind of have interinstitutional conversations over the past 2 years that resulted in less than weeks after the wildfires started, having conversations, Zoom calls with people whose, at that point, faces had become friends, that we could have really intimate conversations about what it looked like to respond to this crisis. And that type of sustainability was like many years of relationship building in order to be activated at a moment of disaster crisis that needed to be responded to.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I wonder if you can maybe elaborate more on why you think that the smaller institutions maybe are a bit more nimble in terms of how they are able to respond to crises, or how they are able to just like embed resilience within the fabric of their institutions.
Yeah, I feel like this has come up quite often in these museum institutional conversations. The conversation for major institutions ends up being are we implementing BISO protocols, which BISO is what is BISO? BISO is the BISO group is a group of museum directors that have been meeting since the 80s or so. Every once in a while, they come out with a statement or a protocol. And in 2015, for the first time, that group of major players came out with a statement on more sustainable, greener practices for museum spaces and exhibitions, focusing on everything from decision making to things like material use and exhibition build, advocating for longer exhibition runs,
temperature control,
and largely
galleries.
kind of what it often gets reduced down into is this climate control standards for galleries. We could have an entire panel about climate control standards for galleries.
We could. And the absence of actual like scientists and engineers in these spaces.
The brief primer is like if you're thinking about actual carbon emissions for museums, you're thinking about your travel of people traveling back and forth for research or to see shows. You're thinking about your shipping, so like how work is getting to shows and circulating globally, and you're thinking about your building envelope. So how much energy are you spending to actually power the building? And in museum spaces, we have these really, really restrictive conditions of like exact temperature, exact relative humidity that for years people have said are entirely necessary to keep artwork safe.
All because of one book that people did not read.
That the person who made that statement has disavowed.
Totally. and yet, these standards have dictated whether or not museums are able to even receive or give loans, right? Whether work is even able to travel throughout the world. And it is extremely prohibitive. And so relaxing these set points has allowed for a more nimble gallery, at least, operations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I will maybe back up a little bit from getting too in the weeds with climate control standards for gallery spaces.
Yeah.
And maybe talk a little bit about how we got here. I think this is personally a really interesting conversation to kind of better understand just people's journeys. There are very few of us that do climate-focused strategy specifically for the art museum space, and I have a lot of thoughts to say about that, but I think it's relevant, like, how did we end up doing this? Like, how did you end up doing this?
Well, I had no idea that I would end up here. I had no ambitions of even working in the art space, but I started my career as a lawyer, and I supported arts and arts institutions, specifically Black, queer artists, to really sort of equitably approach the protection of their intellectual property. And I ended up in this space because I was hyper obsessed with waste and this idea that waste is not just about a materiality and what we waste in terms of materials, but how we waste entire communities, how we waste entire cultures, who is designated as wasteful, etc. And so I approached this through fashion initially, and began to sort of create scholarship around tying social justice, social impact, environmental justice, and climate justice into the fold of art and design. And I co-founded an organization called Sustainable Brooklyn in 2018, which was a further extension of my work, which was really to take all of this information from the ivory tower and provide educational opportunities, non-traditional educational opportunities for communities to really establish agency within the sustainability movement, and to address the omission of critical voices from the solution making that was starting to unfold around like the 2010s. And so through Sustainable Brooklyn, I ended up at Parsons, and I ended up teaching ethics and economics, business strategy, sustainable business strategy, and business law at Parsons. And then this job description was sent to me from a colleague at Parsons, and she was like, you know, this Guggenheim job description sounds eerily like you. You know, she was like, I think you should apply. And I was going through a lot of personal transitions at the time, so I said, well, why not? And I got it. And I approached the work, you know, with just this very humble perspective that I'm here to learn from all of y'all. And we're here to learn together, because none of us are experts in this. As the climate crisis continues to unfold, as it continues to show us that we are not experts at living, how can we harness a lot of these lessons in terms of responsiveness to the climate crisis, and really center these institutions in a way that they have never really been in conversation with communities before, right? So yeah, that's how I got here.
Yeah. I'm curious, kind of going from that like legal background, thinking about protecting ancestral heritage and things like this, into that fashion space, into the art space. Like what, as a kind of outsider coming into a museum space, like what was most surprising to you around the sustainability conversation?
I mean, how real are we going to get? Diplomatically, what was most surprising, I think, was just the fact that the institutions were so incredibly siloed, and that the necessary, like the work that we do and the work that sustainability directors do requires cross-departmental collaboration, hands down. You cannot operate in a silo. You cannot be effective as a sustainability director in your own little corner. And so I had to really kind of build that strategy from the ground up in a way that I don't think had been done at the institution that I ended up in before. I also thought it was surprising how a lot of the passion that the staff had for this work kind of got a little like, it stalled a bit, before it got to the executive, the C-suite. And so bridging that gap was a surprising hurdle that I didn't really expect, because I always thought that, this was sort of a leadership, this was led by leadership, right? This was something that leadership wanted, this is something that the board wanted. But in hindsight, it seemed that it was more of a grassroots initiative that ended up, reaching the top. And I had to sort of create a top-down, bottom-up approach that was circular so that information continued to flow throughout the institution. What about you?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll talk a little bit about kind of my entry into this work, because it also echoes this kind of grassroots, grounds-up strategy building approach. So I come to this work very much as an arts worker. I've worked in the arts, as I said, started my career at Creative Time with several of the people here over a decade ago. And in that role was producing large-scale public art, things like the iconic Kara Walker Sugar Sphinx that was at Domino Sugar Factory 10 years ago. I see some nods, and maybe you saw that. And through projects like that and others, was really inspired and convinced of the power of art and how amazing a project like that was in starting conversations, giving you like a physical experience of joy, response, contemplation, like so much it could offer. And also, I will say we did some really great waste practices with that. Like we were actually able to reuse almost the entire internal structure of that sugar sphinx and some other things that we were able to implement. But for other projects over the 10-year career that I had producing these large-scale things, was reminded of like this cognitive dissonance of like, I believe in the work, and yet I'm also being asked to individually FedEx single stones across the country because they're locally sourced stones that need to be there for an opening. And these things where I was like, I don't want to, it doesn't make sense to me, I don't want to do that. And as I grew up and became a little bit more established in my career, was at a director level position at a gallery, then I was sitting at my desk kind of looking around like, how do I make different decisions? How do I advocate for doing this differently? Continue to work with these artists that inspire me on projects that I believe in, but in a way that better aligns with my values for the future, for my planet, for my community, for myself. And my first attempt at doing that was to talk to my boss and say, do you want to do something? And that didn't go over so well. So the ethos was very much like, our job is to support the artist and support the artist with what they want done. And so I realized that what I needed in order to make inroad into that conversation was to demonstrate that artists actually wanted this to happen. That it wasn't me as like a person at my desk forcing my own political views or personal views on this, but it was actually an upswell of a movement happening in the sector that artists wanted to hear from us. So for me at that point, what I could do was reach out to fellow gallery workers, fellow arts workers, the network of artists that I had built over the 10 years of working in the sector, to ask who was interested in having that conversation. Had a bunch of meetings, phone calls, Zoom calls. There was a great group of artists led by Mika Rottenberg and A.L. Steiner at the time who were meeting regularly at Sculpture Center to kind of talk about doing a Culture Declares Emergency New York version, got involved in that group. And through that kind of like relationship building, being in dialogue, we eventually came together to form Galleries Commit and Artists Commit, which are worker and artist-led collectives committed to a climate-conscious, resilient, and equitable future. And through that, we came up with the Climate Impact Report tool that artists could actually use as an introduction point to a museum or a gallery when they have a show to think about how do we talk about the climate impact of the work that we're doing? Like, this show is going to go up, people are going to see it. How do we internally have a framework for a dialogue and a transparent reporting process to share that information out?
And I'm so glad that you did that, because that Climate Impact Report framework became the framework for my internal sustainability strategy at the Guggenheim. It helped anchor a lot of our efforts in key categories. And I think what was, there are a couple other reporting frameworks out there, but I think what made climate impact reporting through Artists Commit, Galleries Commit was, what made it different was that you included more social sustainability perspectives and categories that really, it's hard to get that quantitative data, but the qualitative data is really sourced from relationship building, coalition building, and community programming that we didn't really focus on, prior to my appointment. So, thank you.
Yeah, there's a very fast slide that goes by that has kind of the 4 areas that climate impact report looks at. So things like reducing your emissions and eliminating your material waste, but also thinking about supporting the workers and taking collective action to tie into kind of larger initiatives that are.
And what was really interesting, though, when I started, I had a conversation with our green team, which had already been formed like 4 years before I got into the Guggenheim. And they asked me, to define sustainability. And I included time as a resource, right? Like, we don't want to waste time, and your time is valuable. And that was the first time they had ever even, I like the light in their eyes came back, because that was the first time someone had acknowledged. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. That time is a resource, and that's something that we can't waste.
I'm laughing because Whitney and I had a meeting yesterday where we were both talking about our allergies, and then like the auto note taker has a whole section about our allergies. This is an important thing for us to track.
It's very important.
Yeah, and then I will just put out a kind of shout out for my own work kind of in the evolution of those climate impact reports, which very much kind of this like circular framework that you were talking about of going from grassroots to leadership. We started the climate impact report framework as a very grassroots initiative of like me talking to some other artists, coming together, thinking about what we could do from a very grounds up section. And because of the impact of that work and because of people seeing kind of how that framework could really make a difference in the way decision making happens on a project, we've been able to implement that with kind of top level down clients. So I work with people like the Art Dealers Association of America. I work with, we just wrapped this project with the Getty Foundation in Los Angeles for PST Art, which is an exhibition series that funds exhibitions across Southern California. And we're able to actually do climate impact reports for over 40 exhibitions. It means that for the first time we actually have metrics like average carbon per exhibition based on a major institution or a community experimental space. So kind of this like grassroots initial, like I personally was sitting at my desk and just needed other people to do this with me, and now it's actually been able to lead to having impact in the sector.
So it seems like that works, right? Collaborating with other like-minded folks in this space, but also educating people who may not necessarily be a part of the conversation initially. And I think one good example of that was the first of its kind New York Museum Coalition that I founded at the Guggenheim because, we only have 5 minutes. We were able to fill the time. We were so worried. We're like, how are we going to talk for 30 minutes? But anyway. When I got to the Guggenheim, we had to be responsive to local regulations, especially Local Law 97. I am not a facilities director. I am not an engineer. And so collaborating with, the folks internally was helpful, but I also wanted to know what our other institutions in the city, how they were responding to this local regulation, which requires buildings over 25,000 square feet to reduce their carbon emissions by 50% by 2030. And I, put in some phone calls, and we had our first meeting with the Met, the MoMA, the Whitney, Guggenheim, and we were able to really you see these kinds of groups formed a lot, but this was, to me, and the feedback that I received was like this felt very actionable, right? Like they felt like, this meeting wasn't a waste of their time, and it was director level and up, right? And so to this day, the coalition continues to meet, and we've added the Brooklyn Museum, we've added DIA, we've added Central Park Conservancy, and so they meet quarterly, but they really focus on shipping, they focus on exhibition making, they focus on time as a resource, and also how our buildings and facilities are sort of speaking to each other to be responsive to this ecosystem and this climate that we exist in New York City, and that informed CCLAM.
So we did something similar in Los Angeles, where we put together a sustainability leads roundtable that also is now meeting regularly. It was kind of part of that PSTR project and continues. Since we are close to our time, then maybe we'll wrap with our final question for each other, which is
Sure.
Practical tips, like what is a key takeaway or something that you would recommend people who are interested in either museum sustainability or sustainability as a whole to think about?
Yeah, I always say meet people where they are. It's helpful to do a survey of your staff. That's sort of how the sustainability initiative at the Guggenheim got started. 87% of staff said that sustainability was a key priority for them. And then harnessing that data to form collective action is very helpful. I have on the McGuire group if you want to follow my work, but I have created an executive toolkit to respond to the problem areas that I saw and some of the sort of gaps that were very glaringly clear within board leadership and within executive leadership that sort of stalled the momentum that was needed. So I have a toolkit that sort of informs these groups about sustainability. So feel free to download that toolkit. And yeah, what about you?
I will maybe echo this idea of meeting people where they are, but make that even more micro, of like meet yourself where you are.
Period. Yes.
There's like so much to do in response to the climate crisis, and one of the most overwhelming things about that is that there's so much to do in response to the climate crisis.
Yeah.
And one of the most amazing opportunities in that is that there is so much you can do in response to the climate crisis. I'm a huge fan of Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson's climate Venn diagram as like a starting point for that conversation. If you're not familiar with it, it's essentially looking at there is so much to do. What needs to be done? Is that like huge list of possibilities? What would you be good at doing? Like, what's your network? What's your resources? What's your particular skill set? Are you really good at coding? Are you really good at coming up with new materials? Are you really good at hosting community events? And then that third area is like, what brings you joy? Like, what are you going to enjoy doing? It's very important that your action is something that is personally sustainable, which means that you are thinking about your emotional resiliency, your communal resiliency. And in the center of that, there is like a climate action that you could take. For me, that was reaching out to my community and figuring out how we could like start this kind of grassroots movement. And I also am like strangely good at spreadsheets and calculations.
Yeah,
and
you're so much better at that than I am. I'm like, the data goes to Laura. I can schmooze.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at time. Thank you all for your attention on this like pretty banal topic, but it's so relevant.
Thank you.
And thank you to the demo staff. Thank you so much.
Can give them one more round of applause. Incredible. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back for Rave and Release.